So let's start walking through this whole. We talked about responsive intervention. Responsive intervention again is a general education system, and you'll see how it all interplays. And remember, special education is never meant to be a special place. It's a specially designed service to help students that are significantly impaired in learning. That is important to remember, those different terms. So as we walk through the RTI process, let's look at Egbert. We have Egbert here. He's in first grade. He's falling behind in reading. His progress is slow. It's very much like I talked about Steve there on the board. He's behind his peers, and if he continues and we extrapolate that information forward, then we expect Egbert to miss the third grade reading test, which is a must-pass test. If you don't pass the third grade test in reading, then you cannot move to the next grade level without specific things. So what happens next? And Egbert, one thing we're going to find is students with learning disabilities are going to be very similar in their behaviors of kids that have ADHD and kids with behavior and emotional disturbance. The reason is because if they don't like something or they're not learning something, they're going to be distractible, inattentive, and they're going to be behavior problems in the classroom. So the first thing for you as a teacher is to identify if the student is not learning at the rate his peers are. If that's happening, then it's very likely a learning problem and not a behavior problem. So that's very important to remember. About 90% of all behavior disorders have a learning disability element to it. So that's really, really important. If you take care of the foundational problem, then you don't have the problems later on. So that's important too. Okay, so we've got Egbert. So we're going to try to do a problem solving without following a procedure. And it kind of does, this is just a joke of a thing. If you look at it, it says, I'm going to try this and see if it sticks to the wall. You know, we're going to try all these things and see if it sticks. And if it doesn't, then I can blame the student and not blame my teaching strategies or whatever. Ignore it. It doesn't work. We're just going to pretend it's not a problem. So that's why we have all these kids struggling and they're not getting their work done. They're not progressing because they don't have a procedure in place. RTI, MSS provides those services and a process to help kids learn. So that's really, really important. Okay, so what is response to intervention? It is a high quality, scientifically based intervention process. When I throw out the term scientifically based, what does that mean to you? You've heard that before, haven't you, in some of your other classes, that all your instruction must be scientifically based? What does that mean? I'm sorry?
It has studies behind it.
It has studies behind it. Independent studies. So they have to have been proven not by a company that's building that intervention, but independent of the company to prove that it's that it's an effective strategy. If a school district is going to spend money on that strategy, it must have the science behind it. So it's scientifically based piece. Also, it needs to be matched to the student's need. If a student is struggling in reading, are you going to give them interventions for math? No. if the student is struggling in phonics, are you going to give them whole word instruction? No, you're going to give them phonics-based instruction. So you got to match what the student needs to what the intervention is. So it needs to be taking care of the problem rather than just kind of saying, I'm trying these interventions and they're not working. See what I mean? And going back to that problem solving thing, many times people see all problems as a nail. And if you see all problems as a nail, then what's your solution? You're going to take a hammer and hammer that nail until it's dead. But what happens if the problem is actually a screw and not a nail? Is that the proper tool to use for that problem? No. So, and it won't be effective. So that's important to think. We've got to match it to the student. We have to match, we have to progress monitor the information to know if we're on the right track. So let's say you're on you get on a boat, and you're a captain of a boat, and you're going to sail across from the United States to England in a boat. If you never take measurements to know where you're at, are you going to end up in where you expected? Probably not. If you don't make adjustments and take measurements, then the tides and the winds will set you off course, and you won't end up where you're expected. So even 1 degree off is a problem when you go on a long journey. So that's important. Whenever you go on a trip, you make landmarks where you want to be at a certain time, so you know that you're meeting your goals to get to your destination, correct? Same thing here. We need to have benchmarks to know if we're on progress to make that evaluation effective. And then look, it's formative. What's the difference between formative assessment and summative assessment? Okay, formative gives you guidance on what to do next, whereas summative, it says, well, what did everything look like? It's at the end. Formative is on the process. So we use formative processes, formative assessment, formative evaluation, progress monitoring your students' progress. It's applied individually to each student rather than just saying to the whole class. It's for each student. It's aligned to the resources so it delivers the most effective instruction for the students. That's the important pieces of that. So this is what RTI is. Why RTI? In the past, when we just did the hope and the pray thing, it never worked. We just threw it out there and said, is it working or not? We used to have undocumented benefits. We used to throw money at stuff all the time without getting any evaluation. And it's never works. You've got to know, is it on process? Because we haven't had the documentation there, we have overrepresented in special education. When it should be about 12% of the population, it's about 14 to 15%. So it's important that we don't waste resources and we are meeting the unique needs of kids. We used to evaluate students just without any basis of knowing what to evaluate them on. And it was bad. It didn't give you the proper strengths and weaknesses of the child. It was, you ended up with false positives and false negatives on students. So that's important. This comes out of IDEA 2004. This is the last time IDEA was reauthorized. It is now part of the pre-referral process to know before we do the evaluation. So if you see it here, it's saying, in determining whether the child has a specific learning disability, and you can also put here emotional disturbance, other disabilities. A local education agency may use this process that responds to scientific research-based intervention as part of the evaluation procedures described in IDEA. So it's now part of determining if a student has a disability or not. So this is the final regulations of IDEA. I'm just going to let you read these on your own. This is in your file, so you've got this access to it. So let's talk about Tier 1. Tier 1 is the first intervention. It's the one that's up there. And what's in that dark gray box? Trapezoid. Is that a trapezoid? Where's my geometry tool? I don't know what that shape is. What does that say right there? All students. So what does that mean? So where Tier 1 is all students. So that means every student in your classroom is in Tier 1 for a general ed teacher. Everybody's in Tier 1. It's the core instruction. So if a student is having difficulty, then you're going to look at other things. But this is why I put my pyramid upside down. It's more like a funnel, because not everybody's going to end up out here. Some of the people are going to be affected here. About 80 to 90% of the students are going to be appropriately affected in Tier 1. So Tier 1 is the general education instruction. It's scientifically based instruction in the general classroom. Now, you guys have heard the term differentiated instruction, correct? Okay. Can anyone tell me the difference between accommodated instruction and differentiated instruction? Can anybody tell me the difference? Think of those two. Accommodate and differentiate. Can anyone tell me the difference? Yes.
So an accommodation would be like if the student can't read what's on that on your PowerPoint, you go up to the board and write it bigger.
Okay.
So like adapting it,
Okay.
and then the other one would be just changing the material in it, wouldn't it?
And changing what?
Changing the material that you're teaching.
Okay. Accommodate and differentiate are exactly the same.
Oh, okay.
Because you can't change the content of the material. Accommodate, differentiate. So I'm going to empower you teachers to think of that in any way. To accommodate the needs of students, you do not have to have a specially designed plan in place or a program in place. You have the right to differentiate for anybody. So let's take that idea. Okay, so the student could not see what was written on the board. And so you accommodate by either reading it out loud, moving the student closer, writing it in a different way, giving them a black and white copy at their desk. Is that differentiated instruction? But you're accommodating to the needs of the student. Make sense? So all students, if they need something unique and it doesn't change the content of the instruction, you should do what they need. That's Tier 1. Now, when it becomes formalized, and you start thinking about, okay, a student's really struggling, So let's say you got Steve over here, that's just not making any progress whatsoever, or very little progress, and the interventions, the accommodated or differentiated instructions we're trying are not working for Steve, then we need to do something different. And then you start taking data on, okay, these are the things I tried at Tier 1. These following things. So, in your box under Tier 1, it's universal interventions that meet the unique needs of all students. It's preventative, it's proactive, it's not reactive. You give it to them before they really struggle and lose it. It affects about 80 to 90% of all students. They're high quality, scientifically based classroom instructions, differentiated instruction. You assess about 3 times a year, at the beginning of the year, the middle of the year, and the end of the year. And usually campus benchmarks. And then you as a teacher should get ongoing professional development. That's something you should get every year to help better serve your students. So that's Tier 1. So we have Steve, and let's say Steve is doing this, and we see after the first 6 weeks, right here, that he is behind his peers. What decision are we going to make for Steve? Do we continue to do what we were doing and hope and pray that he gets better? Or do we need to do something different? What would you think? What decision would you make as a teacher? What's the definition of insanity, guys? Do the same thing over and over and expecting different results. So what have we got with Steve? Are we doing the definition of insanity if we don't do anything different? Absolutely. So somewhere along the line, we're going to say, Steve's not getting it. We need to do something different. So we need to move him on. So, but before we get to level 2, let's finish up with Tier 1. I mentioned all these things I've already said. It's scientifically based general instruction in the classroom, systematically applied, and you're collecting some data. Tier 1 intervention is for all students. Here's the summary. Scientifically based, multiple grouping formats, however you want to group your classes. And it's usually just the regular time in the classroom, no special supplemental or additional time given. Is the assessment, the general education teacher is the interventionist, it's in the general education classroom. So that's a summary of Tier 1. So you have a concern about a student, so you begin working with that student, you use the instructional strategies, and you keep a record. The record is then formalizing that that student is now in the process to be referred. As a teacher, you can begin classroom interventions in Tier 1 at any time with any student that you have a concern about. You do not have to meet with an RTI team at all. You could do it at any time you have a concern. Okay, so I've talked all about these things, and let's get to Tier 2. So now then, we're going to say, Steve is really struggling, so we're needing to move to Tier 2. So here at the first 6 weeks, we realized that Steve needs something more. At Tier 2, everything changes. It's no longer just the general education teacher. At Tier 2, we're needing to reduce some things. We need to intensify the intervention. So let's think about intensifying. How do you intensify something? I like to cook, so if I make a sauce and I want it to have intense flavor, what do I do to intensify the flavor? I can do several things. I can add more stuff to the sauce, correct? That will intensify. I could reduce the liquid content, making the flavors more intense. And I can keep it on the flame longer to do that. So those are three things we do to intensify something. So let's think about academically. We can add new interventions, adding something to. We can reduce the number of students that are being served with that intervention. So that intensifies it, no longer a large group, but a small group. So if we go from 20 to 1, we go to 5 to 1, does that intensify? Okay. And so we've reduced it, we've added to, and we do it for longer than the traditional time. So if you have 90 minutes in reading and you need some additional time, you're still given the 90 minutes of reading in the general classroom, then you're going to give them some extra support. So more time. So those are the three elements of intensifying an intervention. So that's what we're doing at Tier 2. We're targeting the instruction, knowing exactly what we're working on. We know the student's not making progress. We move him to a small group setting, 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 to 1, and we add an interventionist, and no longer just a general education teacher, but an interventionist is going to be involved. And it's going to be supplemental time to the general time. So supplement, it doesn't supplant the general education time, it supplements. So that's important stuff. Then we also start evaluating the student more often, twice a month instead of one time in the first of the year, once in the middle of the year, once at the end of the year. So we intensified the evaluation of the student. Make sense? So then, if that doesn't work, so let me draw a graph and we can make some decisions. There we go. My wife says this is tennis droppings. I leave my reading glasses all over the place and so can't remember where I put stuff. So we've got Steve at Tier 2. In the next 12 weeks, let's say, that Steve needs to move from, let's use reading words correctly per minute. Steve is at 10 words correctly per minute right now. The class is at 40 words correct per minute. So he's got a 30-word deficit. In 12 weeks, say 12 weeks, the student should be at, let's say, 50 words. Let's do 52 words correct per minute. That's +1 rate of learning of 1 word correct per minute. Okay? Steve is at 10, and he's got to get to 52, and that's 42 words in 12 weeks. So let's figure out what he has to learn to catch up to his peers. Okay? So 42 divided by 12 is 3.5 words correct per minute per week. So Steve has to do that to catch up to his peers in 12 weeks. But what do we know about Steve? Is this, if everybody's on and have to do one, he has to really rush, doesn't he? So that's not a good thing. So we've got to figure out some interventions that accelerate that learning for him. So, so we get to that first week period, and we see that he is not making that progress. So we moved him to tier 2. So we're at tier 2, and we continue to see him make the same limited progress that he was doing before. And actually it's getting wider as we get there. So we come in and we do an assessment here, and we do an assessment here. You need 3 data points to know a trend. So we see that he's not on track. And we could say tier 2, we've tried it in tier 2, and what are we saying right at that point, right there? Is tier 2 interventions working? No. So we could say Steve is not responding appropriately to tier 2 interventions. So what do we need to do with Steve? Do we need to continue on, or do we need to make a referral for more intensified interventions? We need to intensify the interventions. So now we're going to move Steve, go to the RTI meeting, move Steve to tier 3. In tier 3, we're moving from no longer is he in a targeted small group instruction. He is moved to individualized supplemental instruction. So do you see how this is progressive? This is still happening in general ed. It's not happening in special ed yet. So at tier 3, it's individualized strategies. So we're reducing the number of kids again, kids to about 1 or 2 students to 1 intervention specialist. We're increasing the time, we're adding, supplementing more time. He's still getting the tier 2 interventions, but he's now being added tier 3 interventions. So we're supplementing that, intensifying. Also increasing the amount of time for the interventions. We're also starting to evaluate on a weekly basis instead of twice a month. So that's where we're at. If Steve continues not to make progress, then we must make a referral for a full individual evaluation to see if he has a disability category. So right here, we're going to see if Steve making progress. What happens if we change the intervention right here, move to tier 3, and Steve does this? All of a sudden we start seeing this kind of progress. What would we say? He's responding appropriately to the tier 3 interventions. So we want to keep them going. And so he's making that progress. If he's still doing this, we're saying that he's not responding appropriately to the tier 3 interventions and needs something different. Needs specially designed instruction. So this is tier 3 of RTI. The purpose of tier 3 is to support individualized students, no longer small groups, but individualized. Students who are performing significantly lower than their peers. Where tier 2 is supplemental instruction, tier 3 is, okay, there's tier 2 overall, is supplemental again, but it's still small group. I don't know how tier 3 got all jumped in there. So that's the important piece. Let's look at Egbert. Remember Egbert from the beginning of this? Let's look at Egbert. So we have a benchmark of a class at 24. Egbert is at 11. This is the benchmark goal line is in blue. The yellow is Egbert's goal line, what his trajectory of learning is. Okay? Very similar to what I said about Steve. This is what we see with Egbert. We see this kind of process. He gets better and then drops off. That's pretty typical of a student with a learning disability. So we change the intervention at that point, and then we see that. And then what decisions would we make at that time? We change the goal line to saying he's moving up, and he continues to make progress. We fade the tier 2 intervention if that's appropriate at that time. That's how we go about reducing it. We want to overcorrect it and then reduce the supports. Now then we have Egberta. It's Egbert's twin sister. And the parents were not very creative in names. Egbert and Egberta. So similar performance in reading as to Egbert. She's not a behavior problem, which that's very typical of girls. Girls that have learning disabilities tend to be very withdrawn and quiet. They don't tend to act out. Boys tend to act out. They're externalizing kids, and girls are internalizers. Pretty much, you guys agree with that? We've experienced that all the time. So we have very similar stuff to Egbert. Egberta's goal line, etc. And this is Egberta is making this similar kind of a situation that Egbert did. So we change the intervention, and we see this. So what do we do here? She's currently at tier 2. So what are we going to do? What decision would you make as an RTI team? Tier 3, right? So let's move it. This is what we see with Egberta. We changed the intervention here. She's still not making progress. We made some modifications. She's still not making progress. So we see here, at this point, after the 20 weeks, we're going to make a referral for an FIE. Make sense? A full individual evaluation. P505. All right. What we have is that she's not making progress. She needs specially designed instruction. There's significant rates. The need for special education or specially designed instruction is there for the student. So tier 3 is increased intensity, it's supplemental, it's increased frequency, and it's one-on-one. There's the summary chart of tier 3. Any questions? All right, so what we're going to do is that this is all we're going to talk about today is just getting an overview of RTI. And then on Thursday, we'll start talking about the process of making a referral for special education evaluation. Okay? Any questions before leaving? Normally, I have you guys interacting. If we didn't have these masks and stuff, we'd be doing lots of more different stuff. So, take a look. I'll let you out a little bit early because I talked fast. Get finished. Sound good? All right. Okay. Email me if you have any questions. Module 1 test is due by Saturday by 11:59. Let me know if you need anything from me. I'm down upstairs in 309 if you need my office anytime. All right. Okay, guys, we're all done for today. I'll see you on Thursday. You have a great day.